Welcome to Ruby on Rails seminar series from jpassion.com. Today's topic is routing. Topic number 9. So let's start with a presentation. So we are going to talk about general concept of routing, especially from Rails routing, and then we are going to talk about two different types of Rails routing, resourceful routing and non-resourceful routing, and then we are going to see some customization of this resourceful routing as well as non-resourceful routing. So what is Rails routing? So the main purpose of Rails routing, just like any other routing, any other web application framework, is mapping incoming request URL to controller and action for the handling of the request. And in Rails, the mapping is configured in this file, routes.rb file, which is located on the config directory. That was the main goal, mapping incoming request URL to control an action, but there is in fact another goal. So in fact, in Rails routing, there are two main purposes. Purpose number one, as I said, is matching incoming request URL to control an action. So let's say you have received a URL request, which is HTTP GET, and URL is photos/3. And if you happen to have this mapping in your routes.rb file, and then what it does is basically it's going to select photos controller and show action. So basically this is a URL, so URL format is this, right? And if you have this match non-resourceful routing configured in routes.rb file, it will select show action of photos controller. And the value that was passed in this case will be set as a value in this param hash. So nothing really surprising. Now, second purpose is generating helpers. When routing has been configured in Rails routes.rb file, helpers are generated, and helpers are basically an alias that you can use in Vue. And when that helpers are used in the Vue, the URL are in fact generated by the Rails. So for example, let's say you have this code in your action. So basically you have generated instance, you have set the value after you find record number 3, and you have created instance variable photo that points to a record number 3. Now, in your Vue, you might use a helper called the photos_path and passing this photo instance variable here. And basically, this photo path helper will generate the URL of this. Okay, so these helpers are generated by Rails so that you can use these helpers in your Vue file. And then when that path is used, the actual request is going to be like this. Okay. So basically, by using this alias or helpers, your code is going to be much simpler and easier to understand. And it also reduces the brittleness of your Vue because you're basically using an alias, and the actual URL can be in fact changed later on. Okay, so there are two different types of routes in Rails. One is resourceful routes, which is the default, and then non-resourceful routes. Resourceful routes are based on REST model, and it supports these CRUD operations, create, read, update, and delete, and it generates 7 routes, default routes automatically for you. It also generates helpers. So we'll see what kind of routes and helpers are generated in a few seconds. So instead of actually declaring these 7 separate routes manually yourself, for example, these actions in your controller, index, show, new, edit, create, and update, and destroy actions, basically all you have to do is just specifying your resource by using resources and then symbol, photos in this case, and then 7 default routes will be generated for you along with helpers. We are going to talk about non-resourceful routes later on as well. This is used when you are routing arbitrary URLs to actions, meaning the URLs that do not actually match this resourceful route. Okay, so let's talk about resourceful routes first. So when you have these resources and folders, and what gets generated by Rails as a default is the 7 path slash folders slash new. Well, actually, the basically it will actually have routes for this path, the combination of this URL. So HTTP verb and path. That will the combination of these two columns will actually represent incoming URL. And then the controller is basically, in this case, folders, folder controller. And then these are the actions. Okay, so these 7, the actions represent, in this case, index is displaying list of folders, and new is return URL, HTML form for creating the first photo, new photo, and the create is now the creating new photo, and then show is displaying a detailed information of specific photo, and edit is for, yeah, so these are kind of obvious, the RESTful operation, kind of CRUD based operations. So helpers that got generated by Rails is something like this. So folders path, this is the helper that gets generated. And when you're using this helper in your view, basically the view will generate this URL. New photo path will generate this. And this one, edit photo path, will generate this URL. So for instance, if you used this URL, this helper in your view, basically what gets generated underneath, the actual URL will be like this. And photo path ID is same thing. Yeah, so that helper will generate this. Okay. All right, so now so you can see these helpers are actually postfixed with a path. Basically, it will generate relative URL. However, if you're using the URL instead of path, then it will generate a full path. So photos URL, photos underscore URL will generate this. Okay, instead of photos in this case is generating just the relative path. Okay, but if you're using underscore URL, it will generate absolute path. Now, you can use rake command, rake routes, to display current routes. So in this case, suppose if you have created Ruby on Ruby Weblog sample application, you can just call rake routes, and basically it tells you every the configuration, routes configuration for that application. So here again, these are the helpers, okay, and without the path or URL postfix. And this is the HTTP request, and these are URL. And then these are the controller and actions. So whenever there is a URL, HTTP GET with this URL, the index action of the post controller will be invoked to handle it. All right, so let's do exercise 1. So we are going to create our first, actually the routing application. So I'm going to say Rails new routing app. And then we are going to perform scaffolding. So here we are going to create scaffolding on photo model. And this model has 2 properties, title and age. And when you do that, you can see our routes, resourceful routes get created. Okay. So we'll do this once project gets created. Okay. So we are going to go to routing app, and then we'll perform scaffolding. And then we'll perform migration so that we create a table. Okay, so as you can see, routes has been configured, resource folders has been added. Okay, and so we are going to perform rake db create. So it will create a table based on first migration file of this. So it will create a folders table. All right, so that has been oh, actually I should actually say db migrate. db create, this is optional step. It's basically creating a database. Okay, but when you actually perform your first migration, it will check whether a database has been created or not. If it has not been created, it will create a database first, and then it will create a table. Okay, so this is the optional step. All right, now we can actually take a look at all the routes that have been configured by using rake route command. Rake routes. And we're going to see these 7 routes have been configured. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So basically, it represents combination of HTTP request and then URL, and that will invoke index action of folders controller, and in this case, is going to call create action of folders controller. All right. Now, the next we are going to add, we are going to create, we are going to add some code to sys.db file. Sys.db file is used to create the test data, in this case. So basically, we are adding this 3 lines of code to sysdb so that when we perform db seed, rake db seed, it will add these 3 records into the table. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna use the sublime text and okay. So what we want to do is, let me just clear this guy. So if you go to db, you see this sys.rb file. Okay, so this is a convenience file in which you can just add code, and basically it will create some records. So save the change, and then I'm going to call rake db seed, and it's basically running db seed file, the code to generate these 3 records. So basically, I have created 3 photo the records. Title is photo 1, 2, 3, and age is 2 and 1, 4. So you can actually see whether that has been created by using Rails console, and we'll see all the records of that table, and then we are going to display in YAML format. So you can see 3 records has been created. Photo 1, age is 2, photo 2, age 1, and photo 3, age is 4. Okay. All right, now we're going to actually start. Let me just close Rails console, and then we are going to start the server. Okay, and then we are going to go localhost 3000 folders. Okay, so we are going to go to localhost 3000. So because we haven't deleted index.html file, that's what you get. So instead, we are going to just go to post like this. So here we get the it's actually, it's not post, it's folders. Okay, so you can see we have these the list of 3 folders. Okay, right. Now, if you take a look at the source code, what we are going to see is like this. Okay, so these are basically the generated HTML file that represents the URL. So the first the first record show in this case, let's say this is the first photo, and this is the show link and edit link and destroy link. And if you take a look at what has been generated, the actual URL is photo/1 and photo/1 and edit, and then it is photos 1, and here is actually data method is delete. Okay, all right, and this is a second record. Now, so let's actually try that. So take a look at the source. So that's what you see here, right? Okay. Now, if you take a look at, actually, I want to open, oh, here you go. If you take a look at the actual view file, so that is index.html, index.html.elb file, you can see this is the helper photo and edit photo path, and photo in this case is method is delete, and then we have new photo and new photo path. So these are the examples of the helper. So photo, edit photo path, and the photo and the new photo path. So whenever you're using these helpers, the actual URLs that get generated, something like this. So in this case, photo is generating this, photos/1, and this one, edit photo path, is actually generating photo/1 and edit. Okay. The reason is, so this is basically, what I just talked about. The reason is, if you take a look at again the configured routes, okay, so this photo, this is a helper, right? So whenever you're using this photo helper, what is actually generated is this photo/id, and id is going to be representing particular value, and that will call show action of photo controller. Okay, and this edit photo path is the helper is this. So underneath it will generate photos, ID, and edit. Okay, and then when that gets invoked, it will when that URL is passed to the server, Rails will select edit action of photo controller. And yeah, so in this case, we don't have we don't have new photo. Okay, that's something that we can try. So here, if you do photo here, then here, if you take a look at the source, okay, and what gets generated is the this form, this action is photos, okay, and so that URL is in this case photos new. Yeah, so that should actually have a photos new somewhere. The post method, and action is photos. Yeah, we'll take a look at this one in a few minutes actually. All right, so that's exercise 1. Let's move on to the next. Now, customization of resourceful routes. So here, you can specify which controller to use. So if you don't specify, in this case, this option, basically it will use the photo controller. But if you want to use a different controller, then you can use controller and images. So in this case, it will use images controller. You can specify different helpers. So if you say resource photos and as images, then the named helpers that get generated is going to be using this. So instead of photos path or new photo path and things like that, it will use this as a name of the helper, images path and new image path and things like that. Constraints. You can use the constraints option to specify the required format for the implicit ID. So in this case, what you're saying is that the URL has to have the ID value of it has to be this. So in this case, it has to start with capital letter and which is followed by